From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. First, the headlines. Greta Thunberg called for climate justice in protests outside COP26 venue. Biden apologizes for Trump's exit at Paris Climate Accord. Law enforcement knew about January 6 attacks as early as December 2020. Elon Musk says he would sell $6 billion Tesla stock if it could help solve hunger crisis. Israeli forces shut down Ibrahimi Mosque for Muslim worshippers. India charges 14 citizens with sedition, terrorism for cheering for Pakistani cricket team. Our top story tonight. Swedish environmental activist Greta Thunberg called for climate justice in a protest yesterday. It was outside the COP26 climate summit hosted by the United Nations in Glasgow. Speaking at the protest, Thunberg took a swipe at politicians pretending to take the climate crisis seriously.
What do we want? Climate justice! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Climate justice! When do we want it? Now! No more blah blah blah! No more blah blah blah! No more blah blah blah! No!
They asked a person of color. He doesn't go to COP26. No one cares. No one cares if I.
Inside COP, they're just politicians and people in power pretending to take our future seriously, pretending to take the present seriously of the people who are being affected already today by the climate crisis. Change is not going to come from inside there. That is not leadership. This is leadership. Yeah! This is what leadership looks like.
A hurricane in 2005.
Si el presente es de lucha, el futuro es nuestro.
U.S. President Joe Biden on Monday apologized to world leaders for his predecessor's withdrawal from a global climate accord. President Biden also said fighting the climate crisis should be seen as an economic opportunity. Former President Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the Paris climate deal aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions in June 2017. President Biden told the UN COP26 climate summit in Glasgow he was sorry for Trump's pullout from the agreement.
And I guess I shouldn't apologize, but I do apologize for the fact the United States, the last administration, pulled out of the Paris Accords and put us sort of behind the eight ball.
Trump had argued that the deal killed jobs, but President Biden said fighting climate change would boost, not hurt economies. He promised U.S. leadership and action, not words. While the world is gathering in Scotland to talk about climate change, the talk is too late for Mali. Here's a report by Asad Khan and Saliha Farouk on what's happening in Mali, West Africa. Let's watch.
This used to be a lush green lakeside once. Now it has turned into a desert. Lake Fagubin is in northern Mali, about 80 kilometers from the historic Timbuktu, the seat of the Islamic civilization 700 years ago. The lake began to evaporate due to the increasingly disastrous periods of drought in the 1970s. Gradually, all the greenery was replaced by huge sums of sand. The ground became barren, and the verdure non-existent. Today, the region has become inhabitable. Most of the year, the temperature remains as high as 50 degrees Celsius. There are just 3 months of rain. The consequences for the residents have been catastrophic. They are facing an extreme reduction in agriculture and livestock. Sand is devouring most of the infrastructure. Fishing is a thing of the past. Already difficult lifestyles have become much worse. Usable land has become scarce. People are forced to cut the last remaining trees. Poverty has risen abundantly. There are more conflicts amongst the people due to the scarcity of everyday products. On top of that, due to the dried up lake, there is an inflammable gas coming out of the ground. Every so often, it ignites, and it ends up destroying homes and few remaining trees. The food, security, and economic survival of the natives is in danger. Mali used to be one of the richest regions in the world. Now it is one of the poorest. It is also one of the 20 most vulnerable countries to climate change.
A special in-depth analysis segment on COP26 Glasgow is coming up later tonight, so keep watching Muslim News. The Washington Post reports that the FBI received a tip on December 20th last year about plans for violence on January 6th. That was a day after then-President Donald Trump tweeted promising January 6th protest would be wild. The tipster who called the FBI on December 20th told authorities Trump supporters were discussing online how to sneak guns into Washington. This was to overrun police and arrest members of Congress, according to internal documents obtained by the Post. The tipster said those planning violence believed they held orders from the president. At least 300 offices of the Department of Homeland Security also knew that attacks were planned for 1 p.m. on January 6th. While the agency did prepare to protect its officers, it did not put Secret Service in charge of security. A federal judge ripped the U.S. Justice Department apart on Thursday for offering petty offense plea deals to January 6 defendants. Beryl Howell, Chief Judge of the Federal District Court in Washington, D.C., said they had tarnished America's reputation in the world. Howell said she considered all participants in the January 6th Capitol riot enablers of an assault against the Republic. She commented on the discrepancy between prosecution's description of the insurrection in extreme terms, but settling for second-tier misdemeanor plea agreements with dozens of defendants. The Justice Department now estimates 2,000 to 2,500 people were involved in the insurrection. A group of U.S. military officers is urging a Pakistani man sentenced to prison be freed after he detailed the torture he faced at the hands of the CIA. Majid Khan is the first detainee at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, to publicly describe what he endured at one of CIA's black sites during the U.S. War on Terror. A letter from 7 of the 8 military officers who sentenced Khan to 26 years in prison was published in the New York Times on Sunday. They said that the CIA's treatment of Khan went beyond enhanced interrogation techniques. They also stressed that it bordered on torture performed by the most abusive regimes in modern history. The officers said that the abuse was ineffective and called it an affront to American values and concepts of justice. Jury selection began on Monday in the case of Kyle Rittenhouse. He's the 18-year-old from Antioch, Illinois, who joined vigilante groups last year to oppose protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. On August 20th, Rittenhouse shot 2 of the protesters dead. Rittenhouse also wounded a third person that night, drawing condemnation from the left but support from the then-President Donald Trump. He killed Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber and wounded Gage Grosskreutz. Rittenhouse was carrying a semi-automatic assault rifle and opened fire during the march against police brutality targeting African Americans. The shooting was partly filmed by bystanders. Rittenhouse was 17 at the time. He's charged with 5 felony counts, including first-degree homicide. Multi-billionaire Elon Musk on Sunday said he would sell Tesla stock if the United Nations can prove $6 billion would solve the hunger crisis. His comments came after the director of a UN program said a small percentage of Musk's wealth could help alleviate the problem. David Beasley, director of UN's World Food Program, told CNN that billionaires must step up now to help combat world hunger. He said 42 million people are literally going to die if we don't reach them. Beasley was referring to Musk and Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, the world's two richest men. Musk responded in a tweet challenging the UN program to describe exactly how $6 billion would help solve world hunger. Beasley answered Musk in the Twitter thread, inviting him to review the program's systems for transparency and work with them. A member of San Antonio's Muslim community is speaking out after police arrested a man accused of murdering a Muslim taxi cab driver in 2019. Michael Martin with the Islamic Center of San Antonio said he has faith in the justice system that there will be closure for Adam Hirsi's family. Local police announced Friday the arrest of Valdemar Hinojosa. This was on a charge of capital murder in the shooting death of 50-year-old Hirsi on January 17, 2019. Hirsi was a Somali immigrant who worked as a yellow cab driver who supported his wife and children. Authorities allege Hinojosa fired the fatal shots, killing Hirsi in his cab in the parking lot of a local thrift shop before dawn. Martin said Hirsi was a hardworking, dedicated family man with strong faith. Algeria on Monday commemorated the 67th anniversary of the country's liberation from French colonial rule, amid unprecedented participation by African countries. President Abdelmadjid Tebboune and senior officials attended official celebrations that began from the Martyrs' Memorial in the capital, Algiers. The Algerian War of Independence took place between 1954 and 1962. It ended with the withdrawal of French forces after 130 years of occupation. Several African leaders were in attendance at the celebration. They included Tunisian Foreign Minister Othman al-Grandi and his Libyan counterpart Nejna al-Manqoush. Several million Algerians were killed and millions more displaced in the 8-year struggle for independence. France also committed cultural genocide against Algeria during the colonial era, starting in 1830. Palestinian news agency Wafa reports that the Israeli army on Friday closed the Ibrahimi Mosque in the West Bank city of Hebron to Muslim worshippers. Mosque director Sheikh Hafsi Abu Sinina told Wafa that soldiers are only allowing Israeli settlers to visit the site to mark the Shai Sarah holiday. During Jewish holidays, the army seals off the mosque to Muslims for up to 10 days a year. Since 1994, Israel has divided the mosque complex between Muslim and Jewish people. This was after American-Israeli Baruch Goldstein, an Israeli settler born in New York, massacred 29 Muslims as they prayed in the mosque in Ramadan 27 years ago. Hebron is home to roughly 160,000 Palestinian Muslims and about 500 Jewish settlers. The settlers live in Jewish-only enclaves, heavily guarded by Israeli troops. Authorities in 3 different states in India have detained and charged people celebrating Pakistan's win over India in a T20 Cricket World Cup game last week. In Uttar Pradesh, Jammu and Kashmir, and Rajasthan, at least 14 people, mainly young Muslims, have been charged with sedition, terrorism, and other offenses. In Uttar Pradesh, 7 people have been detained and 1 person has been charged with sedition, which carries a life sentence. Others have been charged with various offenses, including promoting enmity between different groups, intentional insult aiming to breach the peace, and cyber terrorism. After the Indian cricket team lost to Pakistani rivals, some Indians began vilifying Mohammad Shami on social media. Shami is the only Muslim player on the Indian team. This drew a scathing response from the Indian cricket team's captain, Virat Kohli. Coley said attacking someone over their religion is the most pathetic thing that a human being can do. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment on the COP26 conference. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. To discuss the developments during COP26 in Glasgow, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. There is a summit about climate, and people are saying this may be our last chance. People are using strong words. United Nations chief says we're digging our own grave. And the Prime Minister Johnson of the United Kingdom is borrowing words or the absence of words and saying it's time to do something instead of blah, blah, blah. And the Miss blah, blah, blah herself is there saying these people are not going to do anything. To discuss all of that with us is someone who is a veteran of 7 United Nations summits. And today she is comfortably at Ann Arbor instead of crowds in Scotland. Jennifer Haverkamp.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be with you today.
Jennifer, tell us, are you happy with the announcement being made so far about what people are going to do about the climate change?
Yes and no. I wish there were more announcements. I wish there were more ambitious announcements, especially from some of the countries we haven't heard from yet. But on the other hand, I am seeing some very positive signs which will contribute to the momentum that we need to come out of this conference with. I'm referring in particular to India now having come forward with an announcement for trying to get to net zero by 2070, which will not be easy for India. And also the United States announcements today about their own reductions, their own plans to reduce emissions from methane, and that 90 countries have joined together in a pact to reduce their emissions from methane, which is really, really important.
I thought that when the Modi of India announced in 2070, I thought that is too far. But I'm happy to hear that it gives you hope. Do you think it is good enough if everybody achieves net zero by 2070?
Certainly not if everybody does by 2070. The globe has to get there by 2050. But there was always the expectation that India, given its level of development, would have to have time for its emissions to grow before they started to go down again. Their date for peaking was later than those of the developed world. The other thing that gives me hope is that each of these announcements that countries are making, the process under the Paris Agreement is that every 5 years they come back together to say, can we do more? So what you're hearing today are the commitments of what countries today think they can do, but with advances in technology and policy and greater political will, my hope is that each time the countries get back together, they will be able to improve these targets to where we really get to where we need to be.
Jennifer, considering that you have attended 7 of these summits, and today is 26th of this summit which is taking place, have you seen that gradual that each time a conference takes place, humanity is taking a better step, or as people outside are saying blah, blah, blah?
Well, when these conferences of parties, these summits happen every year, it's hard for people on the outside to get a sense of which ones will particularly be important for moving the ball forward and which ones are more just implementing the agreements that they made last time around. And this one is really important for it being the first time since Paris in 2015, when countries are coming forward with their newer, more ambitious targets. It's also an important one for countries making clear what their plans are for providing financial assistance to the developing countries who need help adapting to and adjusting to the effects of climate change. And it's also important for finishing one last piece of what they call the Paris Rule Book for how to implement the Paris Agreement, and that has to do with emissions trading among countries.
It is said that $100 billion a year will be needed to assist the developing countries to achieve their goals and targets and move away from the fossil fuels. But only 10 billion have been raised so far, and not every year total. Do you think the commitments to assist a developing world move away from the fossil fuel are keeping up with what needs to be done?
I don't think the commitments are anywhere near what's needed. The commitment that we're talking about was made back in 2009 in Copenhagen, when developed countries agreed to mobilize $100 billion a year by 2020. And they have missed that mark. But there was a study an analysis that just came out, I believe, by the British government that said they should be there by 2023. It's important to know that they count under mobilizing private finance as well as public finance. But your first question is still true. My answer to your first question is I still stand by, which is that there is not enough money going out to help countries with their resilience, with their adaptation. And frankly, if we don't reduce emissions at the rate we need to, those dollars needed will just go up and up and up.
Is this the reason the United Nations chief is saying that we are digging our graves?
I think the reason he's using that really vivid, dark analogy is because what we are doing with our continued reliance on fossil fuels is to ensure that we will not see safe levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Digging our own graves is that even while we are talking about shifting to a low carbon economy, countries are still building coal-fired power plants. Countries are still building out natural gas infrastructure. Companies are still purchasing and developing fossil fuel reserves, even though the atmosphere can't take the emissions that would come from them.
Is this because the development of green technology is slow? Batteries which can preserve energies are not coming out and growing in a bigger way. What are the reasoning why people still continue to go to something which is so disastrous?
Well, I think there's a very legitimate need for energy, especially in the developing world where there's a lot of undercapacity. And fossil fuels are, for a variety of reasons, in many places still affordable. They're still the familiar technology. There's still actually an enormous amount of subsidies of fossil fuels so that the correct price signals aren't being sent. The prices are going down on renewable energy, on green hydrogen, I think will come around. There's a lot more technology that is still to come, which I think will make the alternatives to fossil fuels increasingly available and affordable. But it's been the energy sources that most of the world has relied on for well over a century, and it's a very powerful industry with a lot of political support in places that matter.
So United States, Jennifer, says that it will achieve a zero emission by 2050. India says 2070. What does China say? And has you seen any progress, any part of these people?
So I think the figure that matters for China is I believe that they have said that they expect to peak their emissions before 2030, and then get them down. None of these commitments at the moment add up to what is needed, and the commitments that came out of Paris didn't. The commitments this round didn't, but again, I think that what we need to hope for is that over time, the commitments will get more stringent and will eventually get to where we have to get in terms of the actual greenhouse gas emission reductions. The other thing that I think is worth keeping in mind is in parallel to what the governments are committing, you have the private sector innovating. You have customers demanding low carbon products and low carbon processes. And so as important as these meetings of world leaders are, they are not the only front on which the fight is being fought.
I was watching Mali. I mean, they had this huge lake, which is nothing but sand now. And so is climate justice being considered a serious enough of an issue? Because there is a warfare because of water, different people are, nation states, nationalism is rising, the sovereignty is being, asserted over water sources. So do you think climate justice has been good enough of a subject for these deliberations?
I think that climate justice needs to be brought even more front and center into the deliberations across the UN conversations, across national governments, across every level. But one of the real tragedies of the situation we're in is that it is often the countries who are the least responsible for the problem themselves, the ones that are low emitters, who are least well prepared to deal with the drought, the fires, the flooding. Small island nations, for them, this is an existential crisis. Some of them will be flooded out and their people will become refugees moving to other countries. And it's how you deal with the equities around that is one of the biggest challenges for the world trying to address this collectively.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for your time. Jennifer Hauer-Kemp is coming to us from Ann Arbor, Michigan. She has been a veteran of 7 United Nations climate summits, and she's a former ambassador with and a special representative during the Obama time. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube and Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.